Welcome back to the Bob and Ted Show. Actually, mainly Bob Fischer Show. Another session with Bob, and you'll find this also fascinating as you did the other sessions, I'm sure. Hi, Bob.
Thank you for having me back. It's really the TED Show.
Go ahead, Bob. The stage is yours.
The stage is mine. Well, tonight I think that when you consider the technical material that's been presented previously, that you would think that in the context of a short period of span of time in recent decades even, that's kind of a short period of time for things to develop, but actually they've been developing for a quite long time. Those people who are familiar with the Knights Templar are aware that there is a connection between the Knights Templar, the Masons, and the Skull and Bones. And tonight what I'd like to do is give you a bit of this historical perspective about how this itinerary code that I spoke of in regards to the 9/11 attacks was actually being developed as they moved civilization from the Middle East across Europe and into America. So I think that this concept that there is a mathematical basis of everything that they do will be evident when you see what I have to present. Okay. We started in Washington, D.C. and New York City and saw quite a bit of interesting geometry and mathematics involved. What I have here and what is on this chart here is the Skull and Bones line. It doesn't just run through the United States, it goes all the way around the world. It's regarded as a great circle. Navigators and aviation and maritime use great circles to find the least, the shortest distance between 2 points on the planet. So much like the equator, it goes around the full girth of the Earth, wherever a great circle is oriented, but it can be oriented in any direction.
Let me interrupt you a minute, Bob. Mm-hmm. When you say that it's being used by mariners and so forth, they're not using this knowing that it's the
No, they're just using the technology of it that's been in place for centuries. This is something that is not something mystical or spiritual that the average pilot or navigator at sea would even, they would just be regarding this as a utility.
Well, aren't they using other means for navigation and so forth?
Now they are. Now that satellite GPS systems and radio navigation aids are in place, but before that, that's strictly a matter of shooting the stars. They use the stars to navigate and to keep their course on these great circles.
Now, are you telling us that they're using the Skull and Bones line, not knowing it's the Skull and Bones, but it is there, and you're using it?
Well, I'm just saying that a great circle, which can go in any direction, is a utility used in navigation, both maritime and aeronautical. The one that pertains to the Skull and Bones, there is probably some overlap, but they don't realize, the average person is not, or the average pilot is not going to realize that they are over it or crossing it, no.
Okay, good.
Okay. So this is something that is aware by a sacred few people. And if you want to learn more about this and how it developed, the book by Willie Mann, which I mentioned earlier, The Knights Templar in the New World, is an excellent resource on this. And in fact, if you open up to look in here, which incidentally, I didn't find this until I went into the bookstore well after the fact of some of my findings. Forgive me for not having marked it off. Here it is. I did mark it. But I was quite awestruck when, after I had done all this reverse engineering and all this work, I picked up this book which talks about the movement of the Knights Templar to the New World by Prince Henry Sinclair in 1440. I opened the book and, by God, there it is, the exact same line. And in this context, the Knights Templar had regarded this as Satan's axis, or an axis of evil. And they had followed this all the way from the Middle East through Europe and to the New World, and they landed in Nova Scotia here, and initially, but obviously they had plans to assert their power and their authority throughout the length of this Satan's axis. And it's ironic that Satan's axis or axis of evil has become of political concern in recent years by Skull and Bones.
So you're saying that you put this together before you found it in this book?
Yes. Because my background in this only started 8 months ago. I had no real education in Knights Templar history or Masons or Skull and Bones. This has been a crash course for me.
Well, you initially said you started this in 1999, I thought.
That was the mathematics that I was working on. Totally unaware. I was just casually aware that this was something that the Masons were, but I didn't study it in depth.
You're talking about the Knights Templar, and that is only 8 months old in your mind. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. That clarifies.
With any degree of depth at all, yeah.
What led you from your prior research to this Knights of Templar?
Well, I realized that once I started seeing the complexity of the situation and how that was unfolding in our face on 9/11 and in other situations, that there obviously has been a long history at work here. And so I put my efforts into educating myself into what is this history and how far does it go back and what is it all about.
Because your inquisitive mind, A led to B.
Well, by the time I realized that there was something more to just this happenstance of mathematics, that it was really a systematic thing, it was evident that people have been working on this for a long time, so I needed to go back and find out how and why they were doing it.
Very good.
Okay. So, in any case, as you can see, this great circle which we will call the Skull and Bones line, because I think they're the group of people who are most active in using it today. You may also refer to it as Satan's axis if you like, or an axis of evil. As you can see, as you come into Europe, it crosses over the southern tip of Ireland and England, across France, Germany, Italy, and goes through some hot spots such as Bosnia, which in the 90s we've had, our conflicts there that we've been involved in. The whole Middle East region with Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia. These areas seem to be politically active as well as a matter of it falling on.
What were some of the other towns? Wasn't there a town in Scotland and Ireland that was rather interesting?
Yes, in fact, I've got it outlined here on the map, and I'll go ahead and outline it now. I'll go ahead and stand up and point it out. This is a area navigation map. It's one of the maps that are published by the Department of Defense. This happened to be put together in 1967 to give you an idea of how long ago they were documenting it in the context of their applications of, this is an area planning map for pilots, and the applications are for defense purposes. And I'll talk more about that later, but as you look up on the map, as you come along here, there's a little town in Ireland called Skull. There's a little town in Wales here called Week St. Mary, and we know that St. Mary is an important part of their ritual and culture. We have 2 Knights Templar who are, actually I believe there's 3, I can get that third one later, but 2 of the original Knights Templar have towns right on the line here. That when they became knights, they were granted land, and that's their essentially principality or whatever. And so it has a lot of historical development, and I'll go into more depth later on, but just those initial observations or give you an idea, like you say, there's some very obvious clues. Okay. In this, they have embedded their sacred geometry and mathematics, and this course, as it goes across the globe, is laid out in a manner that it reflects this sacred mathematics and geometry, and I'll illustrate how that is the case. First, as we leave the East Coast and move up through the North Atlantic, into the North Atlantic, we go by Nova Scotia. And this is ostensibly where Prince Henry Sinclair had brought the Knights Templar from Europe in 1440. Now, 1440 happens to be a very significant sacred value in their rituals. There's a lot of very interesting stories from this resource that I mentioned and many others. Now, at some point out in the middle of the Atlantic, it reaches its maximal latitude, and that happens to be where I have this pointer at this arrow is at its maximal latitude. And it just so happens that that distance is 2,609 miles from the 33rd degree temple in Washington, D.C. Well, that distance in miles is very interesting because one of the very important magic numbers in their realm is phi, and I think I've mentioned that before. It has a lot to do with spiral geometry and many other specific applications in geometry and in physics and chemistry. And it's one of the underlying code values that is talked about in the Da Vinci Code, the golden mean and the paintings and how they're laid out and their composition. That value of phi is all part of the Da Vinci Code. It happens that if you take the digital sequence of phi squared, it's 2.618, or multiplied by 1,000, it's 2,618, which is very close to this value of the distance from Washington, D.C. and the 33rd degree temple. In fact, it's less than 0.3% error. Another aspect of this that pertains to spiral geometry and the golden mean is the square root of 5 has an intimate relationship with phi. And in this sequence here, I'm illustrating that specific arrangements of the square root of 5 with other terms gives you these values of phi, and it has the very unique characteristic in that the value phi is 1.618033988. If you take and square it, the only digit that changes, and this can go out into an infinite series, it never repeats itself like pi, it's an irrational number. The only digit that changes is the first digit, 2.618. If you take that same value and divided into 1. The only digit that changes, the first digit again becomes a 0. You start with 6180339. Another manipulation similar to that, those with the term of the square root of 5, changes the second digit in this series. And this is interesting because that gives you the value of 1.118. Well, it just so happens that the Knights Templar formed in 1118. Okay, so they came to Nova Scotia in 1440, which was one of their magic code values. They formed their initial military knight organization according to another code value. Now, other magic values keep popping up. One of the values that I talked about initially was in context of the precession cycles. And those precession cycles, the one that people are most aware of is the zodiac cycle that lasts for 25,920 years. It turns out if you take the square root of that value and multiply it by 1,000, if you draw a straight line from the North Pole to the Arctic Circle in 1776, you have a distance that it pertains to phi times 1,000, or excuse me, the square root of 25,920 times 1,000. Okay. Similarly, so there's one more magic value. Similarly, if you go over the surface rather than a straight line, then in fact, on a specific day, you are exactly at 1,618 miles. That day happens to be very, very significant. Essentially, these magic values keep recurring over and over again. As I mentioned, that the square root of a precession cycle, the most significant one, the zodiac cycle that lasted 25,920 years, which most people are familiar with, turns out to be a straight line from the North Pole to the Arctic Circle on a certain date. And if you go over the Earth rather than straight through it in a straight line, you actually concurrently get a value of phi times 1,000 in miles from the North Pole to the Arctic Circle. Well, the day that this occurs is a kind of an amazing day. This occurs on the summer solstice of 1776. That date, on that date, you have a precise moment in time where the sun is at its height, its highest latitude in the northern hemisphere.
That was being June the 21st, thereabouts.
Yes, in fact, it was at 17:49 and 23 seconds on that particular day. And when you take a look at what was concurrently happening very near those days, a month before that, you had the formation of the Illuminati.
May the 1st.
Mm-hmm. And then a month later, nearly a month later, you had the Declaration of Independence. So the Illuminati had an influence in our formation of our government and the Declaration of Independence, and certainly being formed just 1 month before that, coincides with not just the fact that that distance of tilt that the Earth was in, but also the arrangement of a particular star. This star that I have circled here is in the Big Dipper. It's on the lower edge of the Dipper. It's called Merrick. And few people realize, why is America called America? Well, America is called America because of this star. Merrick is an Arabic name, and it turns out to be very critical in guiding them, in them being the Knights Templar throughout the time, and then the Illuminati, and currently the Skull and Bones. It becomes a guiding star. It turns out that if you are on the very point of the on the Yale campus in what was then just a colony, but later became Connecticut, that star was at an angle of 322 degrees from the Yale campus. Okay, so this moment in time is like a birthing or a start, and it was marked by this star Merrick, and that star ends up being very important in many other events in the future.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Who picked that star out? I mean, what group picked it out? Do you have any information there for documentation?
Well, I have resources that indicate similar to, and it may actually even be mentioned in this book. There are other references as well that have discussed their movement as relative to the star Merrick. And
why do the Knights of Templar think that the star Merrick is their star and not somebody else's star?
that's their big secret. I don't know. That's something that maybe another scholar could address, but I can only ascertain what was happening and when did it happen.
Was that star under another name prior to this date?
No, this has been named ever since the Arabs had named it Merrick centuries ago. Yeah, the interesting thing is that
So the Arabs picked that out and named it Merrick, and then the Knights of Templar came along and said, "Oh, that's our star." Is that what you're saying?
there's some pickup there, yeah.
And of course, the Knights of Templar went into the Middle East at one time. King Solomon's grave, right?
Or hit the temple.
At the temple. And from that is the growth from that, or the information they obtained there, or they gained there, was used toward their ceremonies.
And the progression of their outreach across the globe, yes.
Okay.
And
So in other words, the star Merrick, named by the Arabs, was probably passed on to or taken from them by the Knights of Templar. Is that what you're saying?
yes, right. And thank you for clarifying that. And a little side note about the name Merrick is that in Arabic, what it means is the crotch of the bear.
Well, so I won't comment on that.
I know. I mean, that's just the way it is. Okay. So
maybe they know more than we do, huh?
Yes, maybe they know more than we do. But be it as it may, maybe it has other hidden meanings that I'm not aware of. But they've used it as a means of finding a heading and a guiding means of guiding them across this great course of the Skull and Bones Circle. Now,
excuse me again. Is this star being used by the mariners?
I don't know that it was a primary star that the mariners would quite shoot the star, so to speak. It could be a star that they could choose to use, yeah.
Okay.
But obviously, in the course of moving from Europe across to the North America, it was a guiding star in their movement.
Do you have any idea why the Knights of Templar picked this star and not another star?
No, I do not. So,
Okay.
Just that it probably corresponds to the synchronicity of this itinerary. So at this point, what I can do is go on and move a little bit away from the mathematics, which is a very dry subject for people to digest, I realize, and just move on to the fact that there are a lot of historical markers along the way. We alluded to a few of them initially. but we can talk about them with a little more depth. We had talked about the fact that some of the Knights Templar had placed their, or staked their name on bits of land, so to speak, or claimed their domain in their fiefdoms in this feudal period. And you can see 3 of them here that fall straight on the Skull and Bones line.
Isn't that the Skull, the city, the town of Skull in Ireland?
Yes, the town of Skull in Ireland falls straight on the line.
That was one of the pictures of it, right?
We have that up on that map. I may have a picture of it.
I mean that one just now.
We have a, it may be hard to see.
Wasn't that Ireland?
No, this here is on the southern tip of Wales.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's the Skull Ireland is right about up here. Okay. Another unique location, and I do bring in a little bit of mathematics here again, is the location of the town Montbard, which is one of the founding knights of the Knights Templar. How should I say, his feudal kingdom. And the unique thing about it is that its latitude is exactly 10 times pi. So it's at a latitude of 32.14159 degrees north latitude. And then if you draw a straight line from the 33rd degree temple in Washington, D.C. to Montbard, it's exactly 6,000 miles. So the positioning of Washington, D.C. has a lot to do with a mirroring or a referencing to things that were in Europe. A few other interesting points. Here again, we talked about Skull Ireland, and here it is indicated on this map depiction here. But also another very interesting one is Zurich. It runs straight through the middle of Zurich, and it is a well-known fact that the Knights Templar are the people who are responsible for our banking system as we know it today. They developed that while they were in Jerusalem, and essentially established a banking system throughout Europe. And that whole system of banking is what we still have in use today.
And Zurich being one of the main centers of banking,
yes.
Zurich, Switzerland.
That's right. That's right. And that's straight on the line. Another interesting point is that if you take a look at the prime meridian, and we talked earlier on an earlier segment about the competition for the prime meridian, or 0 degrees longitude. It turns out Greenwich, England is the demarcation for the prime meridian. If you follow a line through there, you have another one of the Knights Templars domains or kingdoms, or fiefdoms, I should say, feudal fiefdoms, located right down here. It just so happens it also is very close, in very close proximity to Lourdes, where the miracle of Lourdes with the Blessed Mary had occurred. Okay. So now having an understanding that they've followed their guidance both mathematically and with historical markers, there is actual government participation in the utility of the Skull and Bones line, and not just the United States. And that's most evident in the Middle East. Here's how the Skull and Bones line crosses Cyprus right here and comes down into Saudi Arabia. You can also see it as it comes down along here. Okay. Probably more clearly. If you're aware of British history and during the period of time when there was the cutting up of the Middle East into different regions after the colonial period was being dissolved, the various lines for Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, and Iran were chosen by the British. And we are aware that the Masonic influence in the British society is very deep, just as it is here in the United States. One of the locations that, once again, as in with Montbard, France, we have a latitude that is exactly 10 times pi, and it's exactly 6,000 miles. I made a mistake. That earlier distance was not 6,000 miles at Montbard. It was the distance of 2,618 miles, which corresponds to 5 squared times 1,000. And forgive me, I'm sorry. All right. In any case, another obvious application of choosing the skull and bones line as a reference for a political marker is at the corner here between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. You have a distinct 90-degree turn of the border right at the point where the skull and bones line crosses over into Saudi Arabia. So they have used this not only in Saudi Arabia, but if you take a look at the state of Delaware, the northern part of the state of Delaware is an 8-mile arc from the city of Wilmington, and the skull and bones line defines the top of the arc in Delaware. So it's not just in the Middle East that they choose to establish political boundaries. Okay. An interesting aspect of this that pertains to how our government is hiding the code. We saw some of that in the initial explanations of the attributes of the maps that were used to essentially establish the order for the initial attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. using aviation maps. This is also an aviation map. It was published in 1967, and so this system of navigation and that is largely in use today was in use at that time as well. The same cartography rules apply today as they did back in 1967. And we noticed that there were some things on the map that could have been very arbitrarily chosen to be drawn one way or another, but they chose to do it a specific way that indicated an intent. Okay? If you take a look at this map, relative to another map, let's say of the United States, the United States has a lot of places where there's restricted airspace where you're not supposed to fly, and they mark that off by putting hash marks over the area where you're not supposed to intrude. Well, this is at the height of the Cold War, and they do label some placard labeling of warnings about entering into certain airspace, but you notice that this is the Soviet Union, and there's no hash marks prohibiting you to fly into the Soviet Union. But yet, there is hash marks of prohibited airspace all around the Middle East where the carving up of those territories was performed. That is the only place on the whole of the map where these hash marks are introduced onto the map. Now, certainly there are restricted airspaces in various locations in Europe. There are restrictions certainly in Eastern Europe and in the old Soviet Union, but they chose not to bother with any restricted airspace designation. The only place they have done it is, like I say, in this region right here around Israel and Palestine, Syria, and Jordan. It's so...
And the hash marks, and they're all at a certain angle, right?
Yes, they are. Ironically, if you choose to look at these hash marks, which is not going to be something you'll pick up easily there, we'll probably provide some way of looking at it. If you do a direct 90-degree angle to the skull and bones line, is the angle chosen for the hash marks for the Mideast. Now, the convention for hash marks can be pretty well established in cartographic specifications, but to choose this particular angle, which is used nowhere else, is kind of maybe a secret indication of how they're placing significance and attention to certain locations. Okay.
Any idea why the airspace there is restricted?
Well, this was at the height of the Cold War. Certainly, in 1967, you had a war going on, the Israeli 1967 war. It was a hot spot in that sense. There was probably more symbology involved here and than there is an actual civil or military significance.
Would there be the same hash marks today on today's maps?
I would have to get a more recent one to.
So we don't know about that. We don't have an answer.
I don't have an answer to that.
Do you have hash marks in maps prior to this or since this?
Yes, yes.
And would that be prior or since then?
I have similar maps that range a few years before and after that, and those hash marks are the same.
And after the maps after that, do you have other maps that don't have this on it, or you just run out of maps?
I have not acquired those maps yet.
Okay, all right.
Okay, that's a work in progress. The interesting point is that the FAA and the Department of Defense, who are responsible for making these maps, are shutting down access to them. They want to restrict the purchase of the maps, similar in fashion that you go to a registered gun dealer to purchase a gun. You have to go to an authorized dealer and show some identification and so forth. That had never been the case up until November 2005. In November 2005, they attempted to change the rules so that the public could no longer buy maps that they have been purchasing for 50 years.
And the reason being?
I can only guess. Their motivation is that people are beginning to understand these attributes mean more than just aviation technical specifications.
And from the attributes, maybe somebody could look at these maps and figure out what and when something's going to happen in the future.
That's right. That's right. Or, as I said before, find out what happened in the past with more clarity. Okay. A very interesting aspect of this is that in choosing the location of the navigational aids, as they did in the United States, they're responsible for finding the positioning of navigational aids all around the world. A very peculiar location is out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They have a ship that is just parked in one location, and it has a radio signal, a non-directional beacon type of navigational signal, and they have chosen to park that ship right on the Skull and Bones line. Now, the North Atlantic is a big place. You could choose a lot of places to put that and have the same utility, but the chance that you have put it right out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right on the Skull and Bones line, is pretty amazing. There's another one in the English, this channel between Ireland and England, and it's called the Navigational Marker Lee.
Is that a ship also?
No, that's not a ship. That's more of a buoy.
The ship in the Atlantic, is that a British ship, an English ship?
That's an
American ship?
That's an American ship. That's an American military ship.
U.S. Navy?
Yes.
You know the name of the ship?
I don't know that it's the same ship all the time. I don't know. Maybe they change them out. Obviously, the crew can't stay there forever. How they manage that, I imagine there is some turnover accomplished. If we take a look at Cyprus, which this inset in the middle here is just to give you a general location of where Cyprus is. In fact, on the big map, here's Cyprus right here in the Middle East. Okay. Now, on Cyprus, there is a British protectorate on the southern tip of the island of Cyprus, and there is a British air base there. And lo and behold, they have placed a VOR station right on the Skull and Bones line on their air base. Okay? Not just that it happens to run through their air base, but they have chosen to put this VOR station exactly on the line, just as LaGuardia VOR was very closely placed on the line of the Skull and Bones line. So this degree of precision is pretty amazing. As we look backwards up along the way, there are a number of VOR and other types of aeronautical navigation stations all along the line throughout Europe, as well as those stations that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so we start getting to a situation where the statistics become incredibly tight with the fitting of these stations along the line. As we come back across the Atlantic, back to our home, United States, the eastern coast, once again, we have a string of these VOR stations, as we were looking at earlier, this is Washington, D.C., where the 33rd degree temple is. Here is where Yale University and Skull and Bones is located. And there are these VORs stationed exactly on the line up and down the East Coast. So if you calculate the statistics, it gets to be something in the order of 1 in 10 million or 10 billion odds that this is a systematic application rather than just a random chance. So we can see that there is not just a government acknowledgement of the history, but actual utilization of the Skull and Bones line today.
Skull and Bones. We talk about it being from Yale University, and we talk about the line going around the world, going to these various key locations. What about the tie-ins to different countries, like the British? Is that through the Knights Templar?
Yes. Well, the tradition, I imagine there is a commonality in tradition, and there has been some dynamics in terms of who's tied to who and their influence throughout time. During our revolutionary period, our ties with the British Masonic institutions were severed, and we became much more closely aligned with the French Masonic folks, if you want to call them that. But in any case, since then, there has been another reversal back towards an alliance between the Masons in the United States and North America with the British once again.
Are you saying there's competition?
The
French and the British and the Americans?
I think it's sort of like thinking of it like siblings. They fall in and out of favor with each other, and there is competition between. There's
some infighting, in other words.
There's competition in infighting, right? But certainly at this point in time, the tie-in with the British Masonry is very tight.
Any idea how many Knights Templar in the United States? How many Knights Templar in England, France, around the world?
Well, they do have their own website. They invite people to join them, but like the Masons, the greater Knights Templar organizations as we know them today are generally unaware of the inner circle, just as there's an inner circle in Masonry and an inner circle in Skull of Bones. But
you're talking about the higher-ups.
Yes, right. And the ones who are complicit in
the ones who are controlling the organization.
And controlling this New World Order movement. And certainly they use these as a pool to recruit from. The biggest pool of people that they choose to recruit from is the military, and also in the police and other.
The police?
In the police as well. Any organization that has a disciplinary hierarchical structure where tight loyalty and alliances are maintained. They look to those people for recruiting.
How does this tie into some of our U.S. government covert operations? Like, I mean, it's a well-known fact that there's a covert element within the CIA that's been involved in assassinations, drugs, and other nefarious activity. Also, I'm sure that this applies to other agencies such as military intelligence, Department of Defense, NSA. How does this fit into those organizations, or does it?
I believe it does very tightly, because I think that throughout time, the lessons that they learned is to take control of all the critical aspects of society. And the most important critical aspect of society would be defense or security internally or against foreign adversaries. And that has allowed them to take a very tight control over institutions like the intelligence agencies and organizations like the FBI.
Are you saying that the Knights Templar, Skull and Bones, so forth, are satanic?
I think that there is an element of what I would call black arts. I don't know if it's quite satanic, but I'm sure there are elements within it that are explicitly satanic. I don't know that all of them are satanic, but there certainly are those who, if they're not satanic, they are protecting the ones who are.
Human sacrifices?
That you would have to go to another resource for, credible information about that, but my understanding from my reading is yes.
And how many in the United States?
How many of the...
How many Knights Templar, how many Skull and Bones, how many Satanists, satanic cult activity, say the number of Satanists in the United States? Any ideas like that?
I can't give you a number, but I would venture a guess in percentage. It's very small, but they probably less than 1% of the population, but these are the 1% who are in key positions to control things most rigidly.
Well, 1% of 300 million is
3 million people.
3 million people. And that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, and it probably isn't even that large, but even if it's 300,000 people, they could manage to accomplish a lot.
Now, we mentioned, or you mentioned, not me, you mentioned a murder and a suicide.
That happened in my vicinity, yes.
And these people were involved in the bank that or the security agency that you reported this information to, or the security department within the bank?
Yes, Louis Freeh had left the FBI and went to become the vice president of security at MBNA, a bank in Wilmington, Delaware. And through contacts that I had advanced the information that I had at a point in time when I was unaware of the complicity of the government in this. And so people within his office were aware of the information that I had ascertained about the patterns and the mathematics and the codes even as far back as 2002. And it was within a year of that we had some very dramatic things happen.
Murder, suicide?
Simultaneous to that, we had a situation in Washington, D.C. where Admiral Poindexter was trying to promote a program for developing essentially a stock market for terrorist attacks, and that was choked off pretty quickly when Congress began to realize the brazen outreach of impact that would have, and Admiral Poindexter never lost his position, even back in the Reagan era when he lied to Congress over the Iran-Contra affair. Once again, he was just slapped on the wrist, and they didn't move this program forward, at least not publicly. And at the same time, that was when this murder-suicide occurred at MBNA.
Do you think it was more than a murder-suicide? Do you think it had something to do with what you furnished to the bank and to that department?
It possibly could have.
When you say possibly, what percentage would you say that might have had something to do with your insight into this situation?
I would say greater than 50%, but I don't know. I wouldn't say that it was an absolute certainty. No, it's.
You remember the names of these people, the victims and the subject? Or?
I do remember the primer person who was murdered was a gentleman by the last name of Love. I'd forgotten the name of the person who was suicide.
Could it have been a murder?
It could have. It had a.
That was covered up?
Well, it was interesting that the state police and the Wilmington police decided to close the case within 24 hours of its occurrence, saying that it was a closed case, and it was certainly left a lot of questions that, and certainly there were no longer any court proceedings to follow up with. So it looked like a cover-up.
It would be interesting if somebody interviewed the wives of these two men, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Now, one other thing that is rather fascinating is this number 223.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any explanation for that number 223? Why it's so prominent? Why it's the VORs or 223 that goes up to Kennecott, Maine, and so forth, and George Herbert Walker Bush's property? Is it right on? Is the VOR right on his property?
No, it's at a location at an airport near his property, but it's a military facility that our radio facility. It's a VORTAC. My sense about that, after reflecting on it, is that I mentioned earlier that it might be like a PIN number. It may be George Herbert Walker Bush's PIN number.
PIN number to what?
His personal identification within the organization, possibly. That's a conjecture.
Knights Templar?
No, Skull and Bones.
Could it be a number that was given to him as the number 223rd most important person involved in the Knights of Templar in the world, in the history of the world?
There may have been some sort of order to it like that, yeah. Yeah, it's possible. It's known that these people have a Skull and Bones name, and not all of them are known, but some of them are. I don't know that it's known what George Herbert Walker Bush's nickname.
You're talking about aliases?
It's an alias, yes. It's a coven type of name.
Anything else you can think of?
Well, I have covered quite a bit here, and what I've attempted to do with this particular segment is to try and tie in a long history that has been going on here, the fact that there is a mathematical basis to where they locate themselves and also what they do, that there is a structure that they have built up both on the surface of the Earth as well as on the aeronautical level to establish their dominance and their avenues for performing their activities, and that it doesn't just pertain to a very short period prior to 9/11. This goes back a long, long time.
Very good.
It's, if you have any other questions.
Is that a wrap?
I think so.
Well, I would like to point out that the next session involves his involvement in trying to get this information over to certain authorities, people in position of authority, and trying to wake up certain individuals in certain departments of the U.S. government and other areas as to this situation and the fact that you've been basically ignored, and also you've been harassed.
Yes, I haven't had a smooth ride.
And that'll be the next session that we discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're back for another session. I'm Ted Gunderson. This is Bob Fischer. Bob, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me.
I've enjoyed your presentation very much, and it's been very enlightening. And so you had all this information. You've overwhelmed us with these statistics and these figures and the flying and the angles here and the mathematical compilations. And what did you do with it? I mean, did you just sit on it or what? And at what stage did you realize you had the big picture?
Well, it's a long story, so it's something I'm going to have to go prior to 2001 in order to get to the beginning. I had at a certain point in time back in 1999 an idea that there may be some basis for a mathematical language that would provide a structure for a universal language. It was kind of a conceptual idea in my head that I just started to toy around with at first and just sort of easily eased into it. It was not something that was required of me or any kind of assignment, so I just sort of toyed around with it. Started to take shape through 2000, and I contacted some people, including a professor at the University of Delaware, Dr. David Bellamy, and we discussed it and thought there was something to it, but I should just continue working along and see if I can develop it further.
But what you're saying now had nothing to do with 911.
It turned out that the mathematical structure was exactly what I was stumbling into at the time.
But you didn't realize
no,
it was down the road.
I had no idea that there's implications on the world scene.
So this was just a mathematical language, universal mathematical language?
Yes, just as a kind of a frame of reference, if you were to encounter is a possibility of meeting an alien from another planet, you know, and you wanted to communicate with them, language spoken language would not probably be the place to start. You would have to start with something that would be a common denominator, and that would be mathematics.
Okay.
So looking at structures in the mathematical system that had unique properties, and that was where that was my starting point, and had developed that fairly well along. And unbeknownst to me, I was sort of parallel tracking something that other people had already done. And I was just following along that trail in more of a logical reverse engineering sense rather than picking it up directly from any other source.
Well, what technique did you use to come up with this language? In other words, where did you start? Did you start with ABC, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3,
well,
9, 10, or what?
Well, one of the things that I recognized early on is that there are certain numbers, and in mathematics it's in the realm or discipline called number theory, and it pertains to numbers that retain their wholeness no matter what you do to them. If you divide them or you factor them or do exponential functions on them, they always end up with or very frequently end up with an answer that is a whole number as well. This retention of wholeness is a unique property that pervades the whole discipline of number theory. And certainly if you're going to develop a language, you're going to look for numbers that have unique properties that like that, and that the other party would recognize as well.
Give me an example.
Well, for instance, the number 25,920 sounds like a very odd, peculiar number at first, but it happens to be the number of years that the zodiac cycle takes to complete its full course. People are aware of the houses of the zodiac, and it takes 2,160 years to go through one house. We've just entered in the age of Aquarius, so it'll be with us for about another 2,160 years. We were in the age of Pisces for about 2,160 years, so we're phasing in.
When you say you're in the age of Pisces and Aquarius and so forth, what does that mean?
Well, this is astrological kind of context of an actual natural occurrence. The Earth actually wobbles, and there's one of its...
Now we went through this in another session. Yeah.
Right. One of its wobbles is a very long duration, like I say, 25,920 years long. And it turns out that this particular number is very, very strong in retaining its wholeness when you do a number of operations to it. For instance, if you use a computer program to actually divide that number by every number before it, which I set up a computer program to sequentially do that. I went through, up to the number 40,000, dividing it into it, and looked at other numbers preceding up to that. 25,920 retained its wholeness more frequently than any other number. So it happens that this natural occurring phenomenon of the Earth also corresponds to a number that has a very strong mathematical property. A coincidence? I don't know. But in any case, that was a starting point.
And when you look at this particular number, how did you apply that to other numbers for looking for a common language?
Well, it was a learning process for me because I really, having more of a biology and biochemistry and pharmacology background, I wasn't really schooled in astronomy or astrophysics or earth sciences, so I had to do a very steep learning curve and pick up a lot of, and integrate a lot of different disciplines. And it turned out that in addition to, for instance, the zodiac cycle, there are other cycles that also pertain to the Earth's precession or wobble, and those particular periods are factors of this 25,920. And there's no real scientific strong basis for those connections. It just happens to be a happenstance that these numbers repeat themselves in these different cycles, and in terms of their property of retaining wholeness and relatedness to each other.
So where did you go from there? That was your basic beginning then?
That's what I was giving my attention to up until 9/11. When 9/11 attacks occurred, I was in shock. And I recall sitting at the computer actually doing some of my avocation with the numbers and getting the phone call from a person who said, turn on the TV where the United States is under attack. I was dumbfounded. I had no clue of the possibility of that happening. And like all Americans, I think we all went through a period of shock, and I just was, you know, emotionally impacted like everybody else. And in fact, my ability to go back and participate in this avocation was kind of stilted for a while. But then some of my friends encouraged me to take a look at the events, in particular with relationship to my number development. And about 6 months later, I gave in and went back to it and started looking at it. And it turned out that there were things that were beyond random chance, and in fact, they did pertain to the numbers that I had been working with.
Which is what we discussed earlier in our sessions.
Right, right.
And so you had this information. At what stage did you go talk to somebody about this, somebody in authority, that is?
Well, as I say, I started to really look at it about 6 months at the anniversary, 6-month anniversary of 9/11. After about 3 weeks of giving it some time and attention, I realized there were some very obvious connections, and I contacted
Connections to
this mathematical format, and in terms of the timing and the placement of these attacks. There was a lot of common knowledge about the fact that Flight 77 allegedly impacted the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is at the 77th degree longitude. That kind of banter was out there, and I sort of dismissed it as just being, you know, coincidence at first. But then when I looked into it further, there was definitely something more to it. And so at that point, once I realized a certain number of factors were coming together in a systematic way, I contacted the Director of Homeland Security for the state of Delaware. At that point in time, we didn't have a Director of Homeland Security in place for the United States, but the states were quicker to react in setting up their response structures. And I contacted Philip Cabod, who was the Director of Homeland Security for the state of Delaware, for the governor.
How would you spell his last name?
C-A-B-O-U-D, is that it? C-A-B-A-U-D, okay. And I actually arranged...
Just in case somebody transcribes this show.
Sure, sure, okay. Philip G.
Looking ahead.
Philip G. Cabod. I probably am mispronouncing his name. I think it's more like Capo is how we pronounce it. But in any case, on April 11th, I actually had a sit-down meeting with him for about 40 minutes and in the governor's office complex. And he took in the information. He found it very interesting. And I had submitted the material a week in advance so that he had a chance to review it before I got there.
What kind of material and what form?
It was in printed form. It was about an 8 or 10 page summary with specific examples of the mathematical relationships to not just the 9/11 attacks, but also to the USS Cole, the Egypt Air Flight 990, and the Covert TARS. So there was a relationship not just to the 9/11 events, but these preceding events as well. So when I had met with him, he was appreciative and indicated that he would be receptive to anything else I would submit. And he also indicated that he had contacted his counterparts in the Department of Defense and at the FBI, and that they didn't have any interest or hadn't pursued any aspect of that on their part, and they didn't indicate that they had any plans to.
This was from the time you submitted him the written documents until you interviewed him?
Yes, when I had the meeting with him.
So you moved pretty rapidly on it then?
As fast as I could.
No, he did.
Well, yes.
Yeah, because he had a week there.
Yes.
And
yes.
he submitted it to the FBI and his other friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had gone to that. What happened after that then? What did he say?
Well, it was a mixed message. You don't really necessarily get a pat on the back and say, really, come on board and work with us kind of reaction. And I didn't expect that. I only expected that it would be a one-way communication kind of thing. If it's a matter of national security, I didn't expect them to get back to me with any kind of feedback that could possibly compromise national security. So I realized it was a one-way street that I would be.
But at this point, you only had an eight-page document, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I went back and
Did he indicate to you he wanted more details or more information or additional documentation?
he indicated that he would appreciate it if I had it, but he didn't encourage me necessarily to pursue it. He just kind of left it at that.
Okay, and then what happened?
Went back to the drawing board.
Did you have another meeting with him after that?
No. I did have some conversations by phone with him. He was open to receiving information from me, both by dropping off information at his office and also by phone conversations. And so he gave me his card, including his cell phone number, and I had a few conversations with him after that. And
nothing of significance?
Nothing of great importance had come out of it at that point. That continued for a month or two, and I had decided to look into other avenues to pursue that might also be fruitful. Turns out that it was just about that time that Louis Freeh, who had left his position at the FBI as director, came to Wilmington, Delaware, and took on a position as a vice president in charge of security at a bank called MBNA. And that opportunity of having someone so close in town with such a background, I thought would be an opportunity not to pass up. So through some of my contacts that I knew, I had them approach his office and in fact submitted the same material. And
you faxed him the 8-page document?
I went through my contacts and they hand-delivered it.
But it was the 8 pages?
That, and I think I had a little more then by that time. But essentially the context of it was the same, right? And so a passage of about 3 months went by, and finally they got back to us and said that we had passed this on to the authorities, and we
Who said this, the Freeh's office?
Freeh's office, and that they didn't really want to pursue it any further at that point on their part. So
took them 3 months to decide not to pursue it, huh?
yes, I don't know why so long, but that was the case. Yeah. So.
So far, you're receiving a roaring welcome to your research, aren't you?
Not a cold shoulder, but not a warm reception. Okay, somewhere.
And certainly no one seemed to show any interest in it.
No, well, nothing that would
they would move on or follow up with.
No indication that there was anything of movement in that regard. No. So I felt strongly about what I had, and I decided to look at other avenues, and I researched, who's who in this.
Yeah. Well, so in the interim from these two contacts, did you continue your research, or had you completed it by then?
No, it wasn't complete by then, and certainly it was a continuing work in progress, and I did work on it in the meantime. And also I realized that I'm going to have to do some education of myself for realizing what is the political structure of Washington, and who's who and how things get done and so forth.
Have you had an inkling up to this point of the...
Absolutely none.
Of what goes on? What do they say about the belt?
The inside the belt kind of phenomenon?
The highway around
right.
The beltway around Washington, D.C.
Right. I was learning about that. Okay. At that point, I had submitted the same information to both the senators, Joseph Biden, and to Carper, And also Mike Castle, the U.S. representative. We only have one. Okay.
So when you went to Biden, was this after or before Free?
That was after Free, and he actually referred the information to a Dr. Zimmerman, who is a science advisor to the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who contacted me and had a couple of phone conversations. Was interested at first and kind of, got a little bit of the background verbally from me. I didn't submit a report to them. And then just shut it off. No response, no response to my phone calls or my contact by writing.
You called and they didn't return the phone calls?
That's right.
How about Senator Biden's office?
That was through Senator Biden's office. He had handed me off to...
So he passed you off. He didn't show any more interest himself personally, or
no.
His office didn't show any more interest. Okay.
No. And so I also was, like I say, looking into who's who in Washington, D.C., and I realized that Sandra Berger and Mona Sutphin had left the National Security Council under the Clinton administration and had gone to work for a firm in Washington, D.C. called the Stonebridge Group, and they're a banking and business development firm for overseas interests. I contacted them through Mona Sutphin by email and got a kind response saying that they were not interested or should not pursue anything with matters of national security at that point.
When you say you contacted, you sent them this 8-page document?
No, I just sent an email describing what it was that I had, and would you please give me advice or a referral? No referrals, no advice. Sorry, we can't talk to you about it. Okay. So it was interesting that, they were no longer involved with national security in terms of how they indicated that to me, but it wasn't very much longer after that that Sandy Berger was cutting up papers at the National Archives. So, not to say that there was a specific connection there, but obviously they were still involved with national security matters. So, I was...
But that didn't have anything to do with you, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, there's such a big picture with so many pieces of the puzzle. It's impossible to say that it had anything to do with anything. But it told me that, yes, they were just shrugging me off, and that, yes, they were very much still involved with national security issues. So at this point, I learned of a capital venture group that is run by the CIA, and if memory serve, I think they call it IntelliQuest. I can't quite recall the name for certain, but they had set up a capital venture group for technologies and development and science, much like DARPA projects, but would be run directly by the CIA, and it would develop into possible relationships in terms of business relationships with the CIA.
Was it public knowledge this was CIA operation?
Yes, oh yes. And a number of companies had gotten contracts and investments and grants through this venture capital development group. And most of them ended up being things that would have direct involvement with obtaining a widespread range of information about people, about GPS systems, about banking, tracking people through the banking system. Those kinds of projects got funding, but something of my perspective didn't get any attention when I submitted the information. And so that was...
In what form did you submit this?
This was an informative report similar to what I had done.
8-pager?
It was more than that at that point, but I gave them an overview of it, and they never responded. And I actually had gotten some indication of the credibility because I was kind of intimidated about approaching the CIA or a CIA arm of their jurisdiction alone as an individual. So I had talked a lawyer into representing me pro bono, I'm sorry, because I didn't have any money, but yet I felt like I needed some legal, basis to, proceed and some guidance. And they looked over the information. They thought there was something to it, and they decided to represent me pro bono to submit this to the CIA.
They were going to be the go-between between you and the CIA.
They were, and
Did
they did their job. They did what they said they would. When the CIA didn't really show any interest, their participation that they felt was, as far as they could go as in representing me in a pro bono fashion. So I was appreciative, but they recommended that I look towards places like the RAND Corporation and other defense-related think tank organizations.
The CIA did this?
No, this was the
attorneys
did, which I did, and I had contacted Mr. O'Connell at the RAND Corporation, who was the director of research for national security issues, who never responded, and a few others like that.
There's a few others like that.
Think tank agencies,
think tank, okay.
or agencies that have direct government contracts with the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. There's a defense, I think it's DIA, the Defense Institute of America, I believe it was, or I can get my acronym probably scrambled there. But in any case, there was a few others like that. Initially, they would show an interest, and about a few weeks into it, they would just cut it off. Okay, and that was sort of like a repeating pattern that occurred over and over again. I think like somebody came in and said, discontinue discussions here, because the pattern was very, very consistently repeated.
With each instance where you tried to present it to an agency or an individual.
Right.
Did you ever go directly to the FBI?
No, and I was hesitant to, largely because of who was in charge of the Department of Justice at the time. I had no trust of Ashcroft at all, and I felt that my internal instincts said, just stay away. This could be, real problems for myself if I, approached the FBI or Department of Justice, and it was just kind of an intuitive instinct to stay away from that avenue.
But you did realize that the FBI had primary responsibility for investigating 911.
Yes, I did. And I also observed how badly they handled it through just publicly available information. Not to say that the other agencies did a better job, but like I say, it was just more of an internal gut instinct. I should stay away from, I'm doing what I can, and if they take it, they take it. If not, I'll see if I can do something else. After that, I had, at this point in the fall of 2002, I had developed it to the point where I had an 80-page report that I had submitted to the NSA. And at the time, Michael Hayden, General Michael Hayden, was in charge of the NSA, and he is now the #2 man under Negroponte and the national security structure above the CIA. So, so I had submitted that 80-page report, and I was very surprised to get a letter back from the NSA, and it was sort of, again, a mixed message, and maybe if you read it, you could get a sense of how mixed a message it was.
All right, we'll take a shot at this.
Okay.
Heading, it says National Security Agency, Central Security Service, and it has Fort George G. Meade, Maryland, 20755-6000. Has the seal, upper left-hand corner, Department of Defense, United States of America. And to the right, November 14, 2002, Mr. Robert T. Fischer, and so on, gives your address. Dear Mr. Fischer, our Mathematics Research Office has reviewed your technical report. We have no current effort in the direction your proposal takes, and we lack the familiarity with your methods to make a careful assessment. We suggest that you may wish to submit your report to an agency whose objectives and methods might be more similar to your own. Paragraph. We appreciate your interest in countering the current terrorist threat, and we hope that you will be able to find an appropriate forum with which to share your ideas. Signed, Robert E. Mang, M-A-N-G, Deputy Chief, Mathematics Research Group.
So,
well, congratulations. At least you received a response from them.
I was...
So that you're making progress.
Yes, although...
Sarcastically, of course.
Yes, although it didn't get me any further forward. There were some mixed messages there. I didn't quite know how to take it. But when they said to submit it to other agencies, I took them at their word. And in that, they indicate the agencies with a capital A, so I imagine that means national agencies. And so I submitted it to the CIA, had no response. I had submitted it also to the...
How did you submit it to them, in a letter?
In a summary format and by mail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's all, the only way I knew how to try and contact them.
Did you talk to them on the phone or try to call them on the phone?
No, there was no response to my contact, and I just left it at that.
Voicemail?
Did I leave voicemail?
No, yes, with the CIA?
The only thing you can get through to at the CIA is sort of a front desk that, you know, intercepts your call, and you don't go anywhere beyond that. So,
I mean, did you leave your name and phone number? And
yes, that.
With the girl or with the voice?
It was a person who took.
Person?
Yeah.
And they never called back then?
No.
Did you tell that person about your research?
I had indicated that and copied that letter that I had sent on to the CIA. So they were aware of my prior contact to the NSA when I tried to contact them.
Okay.
So the other agency that I decided to take a crack at, since this whole matter pertains to precession cycles and the mathematics involved with them, the agency that is primarily responsible for monitoring these precession cycles for the satellite GPS system worldwide is the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And so I contacted Commander Greer at that agency, and she was very kind in receiving the information, and again, this pattern of taking a great interest into it. She indicated that she would have someone from the scientific staff there. In particular, it was evaluated by a Dr. Dennis McCarthy, who was in particular in charge of Earth Orientation Department. That's his title, or his department. He was head of that. And Earth orientation, of course, pertains to the relationship of these precession cycles and how that wobble affects the satellite GPS system. So I felt like this was an appropriate approach. It was technically a match. I thought that, there would probably be maybe some possibility of a headway here. And I was surprised to find that, once again, the pattern repeated itself after a couple of weeks of back and forth. I had a few phone conversations, some emails back and forth with Susan Greer, Commander Greer, and a couple of phone and email contacts with Dennis McCarthy as well. In the end, after evaluating it, I got a very concise response in terms of their interest in it. They indicated that, yes, that there is something to this, but because they are strictly a scientific organization, that this is not a matter that they should pursue.
What do they mean by something to this? Did they go into detail at that?
Oh, they encouraged me at this point actually to look at this from the perspective of numerology and maybe look at it from more of a social context, with a perspective of possibly looking at how other groups of people look at numerology. And they actually said that in their email.
Did you have copies of the email then?
Yes, I have it secured away. Yes. So.
But they weren't interested.
They sounded like they were ordered not to continue any communication with me. And at the time,
Did they say this?
Yes, they said that this was the final communication.
But they didn't say that they were ordered not to, though, huh?
No, they didn't say that. But
Did they actually say this is the final communication?
They didn't actually say that, but the context of their writing indicated this is going to be it. And in fact, when I wrote back again, there was no response.
Sayonara.
Sayonara. And little did I stop to consider that this was in Dick Cheney's backyard. So
physically there.
Physically, this is Dick Cheney's backyard. And I realized that there was meddling going on the part of Dick Cheney with the national security issues, but I didn't realize that it would also reach his hand and possibly into the Naval Observatory. So at that point, I was sort of at a stall. I had kind of run through the gamut of what I thought were reasonable possibilities to pursue, but I realized I still had something here. But I still thought it was in the context of Al-Qaeda and some aspect of their Muslim tradition, and of course the Arabs at the height of their civilization in 900. The 9th century, 8th and 9th century, were at the epitome of their mathematical and astronomical development. In fact, most stars, the common name of most stars are Arabic names. Much of the mathematics that we deal with today were developed by the Arabs. And certainly this number system that I was encountering quite probably was, they were aware of it as well. So I was still in the frame of mind, yeah, there may be, this Muslim Arabic connection here that I'm still dealing with. And so I continued to watch and observe and fine-tune the information that I had from a mathematical perspective and how it related to events that were occurring, and still finding some, specific signs that there is something to this. But like I say, I was kind of stalled in terms of moving ahead with any kind of agency with it. Which brought us to, the fall of 2003, or actually August of 2003, and then some very peculiar events started happening to me personally.
Going back before you go into this, speaking of the Arabs, now in our previous conversations, you've indicated that certainly there's people within our government who are involved in this.
As I came to realize later, yes.
Okay. But in our conversations, I mean, you basically have documented this, that there's an element within our government that's involved in these terrorist activities.
They have left their signature.
And they've got the signature, right.
Right.
All the way up to Maine.
Yes.
Okay.
Kenny Bunkport, in fact.
Right. Okay. Now you're saying that you feel that the Arabs were involved, have been involved also. Is that what you're saying? Because of this numerology and you're saying that they were the ones that really initially developed the numerologies?
I think there was a transition, and especially at the point in time of about 1118, when the Knights Templar became involved with the Middle East political and cultural situation when they came into Jerusalem, ostensibly to provide a support structure for people who wanted to visit the Holy Land. But in fact, they had an agenda, and that they felt that they were how should I say, prima donna line of persons of the descents of Jesus Christ. And I can't pronounce it correctly, but I think they call it the Merovingian line of royalty, who feel that they are actually the offspring of Jesus. So they were actually there in Jerusalem to find documentation of this and in the Holy Land. And they felt that they were finding this in the underneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. So they were excavating and finding relics and clues. And in interfacing with the Muslim people there, I think that's where they picked up on a lot of the number systems that became part of their ritual, a spiritual ritual tradition that continued on to this day up to the Masons and other secret organizations. So there was a handoff, so to speak.
Very good. Excellent explanation. Go ahead.
So in terms of having run the gamut of my approaches to the government, I continued on plodding away and just hoping someday that there would be a break. And it turned out that...
this is August 2003?
Yes. And certain political events start to unfold in Washington that, and in Wilmington, Delaware, that were very perplexing. At that time, Admiral Poindexter was in charge of a DoD project, which ostensibly was to create a futures market on the impact of terrorist attacks on our economy.
Yeah, DoD being Department of Defense.
Right, Department of Defense, which was an astoundingly amazing, brash idea to think that you could, create a futures market based on our destruction. There was certainly an outcry and a backlash against Poindexter, who had a reputation from the Reagan era of lying to Congress directly, and here he was simultaneously put in charge of a program that was supposed to spy on everybody in America by collecting all information everywhere about all movement of all people everywhere. So with that information that they're proposing this market based on terrorist attacks, I started to think that, well, this is incredible. Why would you even have a motivation to do it unless you had some sense of yourself or some insiders having privileged information that would allow them to have trading leverage over other people who might enter into that absurd relationship financially. That sent off some alarms for me, and coincidentally, the very same week that this backlash against Poindexter occurred, there were events that were occurring at MBNA in Wilmington, Delaware, that were extremely peculiar. We had a murder-suicide of a high-level person who was in charge of creating, quote, new products for the MBNA organization, and two people who were involved with the security of MBNA.
That's a bank.
That's the bank that I submitted the information to Louis Freeh.
Right.
And I started, also simultaneously having very intimidating things happen. I had my computer essentially sabotaged via the internet. When I went in to kind of, do some personal evaluation of how it happened, I looked into the system files and found found new files that were introduced that had .gov suffix on it.
Meaning government.
.gov, government, right, and introduced into the file structure at the point in time when it was being attacked and destroyed.
Which means that somebody in the government was the one that came in and destroyed your computer?
They did it by the internet.
Are you saying that that's the signature of the person who destroyed it?
Well, I mean, it's very unusual to have a hacker
say .gov.
Yeah, create a whole virus system that would completely destroy a file structure, not just a file structure, but its capacity to even function as a hard disk, and leave files that were, you know, a thumbprint that said .gov. I mean, what are you supposed to assume, you know? So we had also indications that our phone was being monitored, strange sounds, clicks, that kind of thing. Just a little before that, we had an amusing situation develop where we were starting to have a party line on our line. And
party line meaning
no, there was people down the street on the same line, just like the old days where, you know,
lines across, in other words.
You're connected together, yeah, shared. And so when the telephone repairman came out and climbed up into the box and looked into it, and he said, well, there was this undocumented line that was attached to your phone connection, and it happened that some other technician decided to use that line for the person down the street. so he went in and he just cut it with a clipper. So obviously they had connected in a hard line that some other technician had you know, just stumbled into and used for a new line down the street. So
you think that this whoever was on your phone were the people that were tapping you?
Oh, I was pretty confident that, you know, that there was probably some agency that was keeping track.
You think those were the people that were doing it?
I didn't know exactly which branch of the government was doing it. I would only guess that there was several choices, but I had no strong feeling about any one agency or group. But I got the sense that this is beyond the pale of what you would expect in terms of monitoring my activities. And then the icing on the cake was when I was sitting in my front room watching TV, and I had a pointer dot from a aiming sight from a gun paint a red dot on the wall across through the window from behind my head.
A laser beam.
Laser beam.
A red laser beam.
And I moved my head away from the window, but you could see it dance around. It was, you know, searching for a target. Later on, I looked through that angle and that it was coming from and where it hit the wall, and it was obviously coming from a vacant house, catty corner across the street. And needless to say, we were terrified. Intimidated in the context of things that are going on in Washington, D.C., what's happening at MBNA, the murder-suicide, and then all this happening in the frame of about a week or 10 days really was alarming.
Did the murder-suicide have something to do with you, do you think?
Yes, because...
Can you explain that?
My feeling is, my theory about it is, number one, I should give a little bit more information that the state police closed the case within a matter of 1 day after the occurrence. There was no further investigation. Information that got into the paper was probably more than they would have liked to have printed in the paper, indicating that these people were involved with the security department of MBNA. And that most probably what happened was there was some effort on the part of these people in MBNA to use something of my findings to give them an edge in a futures market for terrorist attacks. Okay, And when that fell to pieces, when Poindexter was called in the carpet for even moving forward with a project like that, there was an outcry from the Senate and the Congress both to, dress him down quite severely. And at the same time, the plans crumbled at MBNA, and this murder-suicide ensued to possibly cover tracks.
Do you think that the people the murder-suicide, their names, do you have their names?
I don't have them with me tonight, but I can get them for you.
Well,
they're in the paper.
Yes. But my question is, were those people with whom you were in contact?
I didn't have direct contact with them, but they are in the same department of the people that I did contact.
So you feel that the murder-suicide related indirectly to your project?
There's a possibility.
Possibility.
And since there was that very short time span when all these events were happening simultaneously, I think that the attempt to, point this laser beam through the window as an aiming site was a sense of intimidation, destroying the computer, making it obvious that we were being listened to on the phone. I think that they were all attempts to say that
discourage you from going further.
Discourage me from
and
saying intimidate me. Yeah, exactly.
Well, join the crowd.
Okay. Well, I got my initiation. I got my baptism there.
Did you receive any? Those have all happened to me, by the way. And
okay.
And not only that, I've had 2 of my windows shot out.
Okay. There was an exchange of fire. There was only the aiming.
Well, there will be later on as you keep going. I can assure you that.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Of course, I don't know if there will or there won't. But anyway, have you had any I call breather telephone calls where people are on the line and they don't say anything, they just breathe?
No, I didn't detect any breathing, but I've definitely had phone calls where there was silence at the other end.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, silence at the other end, and also...
Well, I call them breathers because nobody talks.
Right, or that when I'm in the middle of a conversations, there were clicks, or sometimes it sounded like Morse code.
Are you still receiving those type phone calls?
Intermittently, yeah. So...
well, join the crowd.
Yes, I don't think
I've been receiving those for 26 years.
No, it would be a probability that this would be create a political furor if this were to come out in the context of the situation right now with domestic spying, and certainly, I was not involved with Al-Qaeda activities except for my information that I was sharing with the government, but yet these things did happen to me.
So anybody else that you talked to?
That did put a damper on me for a while. I think that not understanding what was going on and having encountered that, I was pretty shaken. I was concerned for other people in my life that were at risk as well, including my children. And I think that it took me, kind of like the 9/11 impact, it took me a little while to emotionally bounce back and recover from that. Then I continued to see other alarming things, like when the children were killed in Beslan and in Russia. I came to realize that the indications of the information that I had passed on to the government, the structure of it, obviously had not been passed along to the Russian government, because when the 2 airliners went down a few days before the Beslan attack, that specific site and at that particular time was at risk. And I had no idea whether there was sharing of information with them or not, but when I found out that the 600 or 800 children were killed, I was very shaken about that as well. I had seen confirmations of my findings in the public venue when we had the initial bombings in Saudi Arabia in May of 2003, I believe it was, and that was certainly well publicized that the American government was saying, you know, the Arabs need to beef up security and so forth, and that was at a time when I was going home to visit my mother who was dying, and had the very peculiar experience of when I left the house, I didn't want to leave anything, you know, of sensitive nature behind, so I took the computer with me. Well, by the time I was leaving Pennsylvania on the way back to Missouri.
You're driving?
Yes. I'm being followed by a canary yellow Corvette, you know, standing out in the open Corvette, and any time that I would speed up, he'd speed up. If, you know, I slowed down, he'd stay behind. You know, it just was very obvious. I'm a courier by profession, so I know when I'm being followed, and this was, I mean, you would have to be a fool not to recognize this. Well, he followed me for the whole span of Ohio and Indiana into Illinois.
How many hours is that? 6 or 8 hours?
That's more than that. It's close to 10 hours. It's a, yeah, it's probably between 8 and 10 hours. So,
and you finally get rid of him?
Yeah, that was his decision. I had no hand in getting rid of him, but I did have one amusing event where, because of the nature of my mother's situation, we were trying to get through as quickly, and we were driving straight through. And my partner and I, along the way, had packed things in the back seat just for, you know, to eat and such. And when she had turned around to get something to make a sandwich out of the cooler in the back, he was following us right on our left rear quarter panel. And when she turned around, he dropped back about 300 yards in about 10 seconds. Yeah, making it extremely obvious.
Your partner was going for a piece, huh? For a gun.
That's maybe what his concern was, yes. But it was only a bologna sandwich.
It was only a sandwich, okay. He didn't know that, though. Yes,
but in any case, we got a chuckle out of that.
So are these harassments and intimidations, they still going on?
It's less obvious. We still have obvious concerns with our phone. I'm very cautious about what I discuss on the phone. And we haven't had any interventions of the nature that I described. I had left out one of the major ones that happened in the August of 2003, and that we had a sneak and peek that I kind of interrupted.
A what?
A sneak and peek in the
house.
Sneak
and peek?
In our home, yes. We had somebody come in to look things over, and it had become apparent that he had been there before. What had happened with my job, it has a variable schedule. Turned out that I had worked late the night before, so I wasn't going in until about 11 o'clock that morning. And we have 2 dogs that tend to bark at anything that walks down the street, and are quite an annoyance in that way. But they also have a kind of whimper or vocalization when one of the family members comes home, and you know, you get an indication that somebody is at the front door that we know. Well, I heard the dogs, you know, whining like, you know, vocalizing like they were happy to see someone, and I thought it was someone that I would welcome as well. And so I walked down the stairs, and as I got down to the front room, he was already in, and the dogs obviously knew him from before. He was posing as a pest control person who ostensibly was following an order to get rid of pests in our house that we didn't have, that we didn't order. And I started to question him about it and asked him how he got in. And I knew the door was locked because I was, you know, down earlier and had checked it. And obviously he had gotten in by some means of his own making. And he indicated that the door was unlocked and he just walked in. We had, over the period of a few weeks before that, noticed a smell around the house, and we weren't quite sure what it was. We thought, well, maybe the neighbors next door are getting, you know, some sort of pest treatment on their house, and that we were getting the scent of it at our house. But when the dogs had reacted the way they did, we were certain that he had been there before.
And made friends with the dogs.
Yes, he had befriended the dogs. And also when I asked to see the work order for the house treatment, it was a generic blank work order, no heading, just, you know, indicating our address with a different person's name. And when I looked at the truck, it just said pest control on it. It had no name, no telephone number, no, it was very generic. And obvious that, you know, this person wasn't there to take care of any
official business.
Well, any bug business.
You don't know that.
the biological bug business, yes.
Of a particular type of bug.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that that added to our concern at the time.
And this was in August of '03 then?
Right.
Anything since then?
Nothing of that magnitude, no.
Any indication that you've had other surreptitious entries, or surreptitious entries per se?
Not that we found evidence of. Not to say that they would be successful in getting in and out and are not knowing it.
What was the smell that you...
It was, in fact, a pesticide smell.
So he went in there
and actually sprayed.
On his own?
Yes.
Without knocking on your door or without permission then?
Right, and had been doing it for a few weeks. So.
You think it was poison gas?
I wouldn't have thought about it in that regard at that time, but you know, anything is possible. So.
You had no right to be in there.
No.
Did you get the license number?
I could not get the license number because he pulled away too fast. So.
Did you make an incident report with the police?
No, because I knew it would go nowhere.
I know, but in the future you should.
Okay.
Advice from somebody who's made dozens of incident reports.
Right, okay. All right.
Yeah, no, it's good. Build a case.
Okay.
And another suggestion I have is make notes. Dates, times, places, when anything like that happens to you.
Right.
Carry a camera with you. If you have a surveillance on you, take their picture. And carry a tape recorder with you at all times. So you can go right into the tape recorder and say on such and such a date, such and such a time, this is what happened.
Right.
And that person happened to be driving right alongside of me right now in a yellow sports car.
Yes. Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Those are just a few little tips that I'll pass on.
I have a lot to learn.
Well, I'm sure you'll do very well. You're a very intelligent man. So what's happened, anything since then?
Well, obviously something has happened since then. There was an awakening of sorts. I had...
By the way, and also put a Medico lock on your door. M-E-D-E-C-O lock.
Okay. All right. I'll remember that. All right. In any case, it wasn't until 2005 that anything really remarkable happened. At that point in time, I was on an assignment in which I was driving around in an area that was an area that I hadn't driven in for a while, and I happened to just scan through the radio and had picked up a station that was talking about the truth movement and what happened on 9/11, and it happened to be Alex Jones's show, and so that was my first awakening that, you know, there's pieces of the puzzle that I hadn't even considered that I needed to reevaluate.
And by the way, Alex, thank you very much for being on that radio show, giving him a wake-up call.
Yes, thank you.
And from there, you started putting the pieces together, a little more, a little more, a little more each day.
As you have seen in the prior presentations, yes, I have put together a more solid case of their participation in 9/11, yes. And
So that's why you're here.
that's why I'm here.
Well, now, exactly why are you here? How did you come into contact with, say, me and my colleagues out here who are filming this interview?
It was very hard for me to do any outreach because I didn't have any idea where to go. I wanted to make contact with people, but the information that I had was so sensitive that I didn't dare just mail it away or send it by email, or I looked for people whom I could hand deliver and discuss it directly with. And it wasn't until this past fall when, after having this knowledge and built a strong case, that I encountered a copy of the American Free Press by a kind of happenstance situation where, again, I was filling in an assignment where I was at Dover Air Force Base. They have.
Let me interrupt you. And American Free Press is a Washington, D.C. publication. And I think it's American Free, on the website, it's AmericanFreePress.net, but I'm not sure. But anyway, it's worth looking into, and it's worth subscribing to.
Yes, I agree. Apparently someone at the Air Force Base was a subscriber, and they had taken their previously read issues and tore off the mailing label and threw about 8 or 10 copies of it in a wire rack next to the exit to the door. And I was
You were on the
I was on my
courier?
work as working as assignment, yeah, as a courier. And as I walked out the door, it caught my attention, and the headlines were obviously not something you would expect at a United States Air Force Base. And I picked up 2 or 3 copies of it and took it along with me and got quite an education. And also the first opportunity to recognize someone who was of like mind that I could contact within, at least driving distance. And that's how I contacted John Nugent at American Free Press. And through John, I met Malcolm and Clarence Malcolm. And Clarence introduced me to you. So here I am on the other side of the world, was able to scrape together the money to get out here and present this to you so that people have a chance to get to know what this is all about.
Excellent.
At the same time, I had tried to make an outreach to National Public Radio. I had been following their news coverage off and on throughout time, and I noticed that they were allowing some of their guests on their programs to bring up specific details of the truth movement, and they would give it a little bit of attention, and then they would move on to something else very quickly. But it was evident that they were trying to get, a little inkling of it out. So I had contacted one of the correspondents, Marty Moskowing, and once again, she is based in NPR in Philadelphia, and WHYY. And so I drove up there and hand-delivered material to her, had a few phone conversations with her after she evaluated it, and she indicated that the situation at NPR at the time was when they were being constrained by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting oversight of NPR for being too liberal, and that this was not something that she could immediately use that day, or she didn't feel like that she could make any headway with it. And so she returned the material and sent me a note that, let's see, she says, "Thanks for sending me the information. I'm sorry I couldn't be of any more helpful, signed Marty Moskowing." She wouldn't even send me a letter-headed response. She was kind enough to give me a handwritten response, though. So obviously the press is being constrained in their ability to even allow this material to be covered.
Controlled.
It's extremely controlled.
Where do we go from here?
We try to, in all possible ways, get the message out, because it is quite certain that they plan to do something again. And if it's soon, We may not have a capacity to react, but if this information is out there, I think people will be watching so closely that they are hogtied so that they can't do it. And possibly there might actually be the impeachment of some very high officials for high crimes. No misdemeanors on this. It's all high crimes.
Treason.
Treason. Murder.
Absolutely.
Mass murder.
And illegal and invasion and violation of our civil rights.
Yes.
And the Constitution.
And that's their whole objective. Yes.
And to take over the world.
Yes.
The United States first and then the world.
And they're well on their way.
Absolutely. And it's called the Illuminati.
And the New World Order.
The New World Order, globalism.
Skull and Bones.
Skull and Bones.
And all the organizations that they control. And
the highest level of the Masonic Lodge.
yes.
The very high. You have to understand, and I always say this in my lectures, and I've given a number of lectures, that the people only at the higher level of the Masonic Lodge are the ones who are involved in this.
I agree.
And I'm not saying that everybody at the highest level or in some of the various lodges are all involved in this.
Right.
But the people in the lower levels of the Masonic Lodge are, everyone I've ever met, I had a lot of confidence in them. They're good people.
Yes, and they're for good causes.
For good causes.
And they're serving the community.
So I think we need to qualify that.
Yes, it's...
And another qualification I think we need to make is that there are a lot of good people in the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and these various alphabet agencies in the government. There's a lot of good people in Congress, not an awful lot, but there's some. And I think we have to understand that not everybody in the government falls in this category.
That's right. That's right.
This is, I've been called a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist. There is a conspiracy. And I think that you, Bob, have certainly done an outstanding job of documenting this in the presentations that we've had the last several days.
Yes. Well, I appreciate your having me and taking the time to review it, and it's certainly a monumental step forward to have accomplished this. Thank you.
And thank you very much, and God bless you.
God bless you.